Today I want to talk with you about the #1 skill that I think everybody who designs sounds for a live worship band needs to know. We're going to talk about EQ. Hey everyone, David from Sunday Sounds here. Welcome to video 3 in our series on building patches that sound great live. Simply put, EQ gives you the ability to raise or lower the volume of any specific set of frequencies. So you can make low sounds louder or quieter, you can make high sounds louder or quieter, or anywhere in between and any combination of those decisions. If you understand EQ, then you're able to carve out space for each of your sounds in the mix and make sure that you're not getting in the way of the lead vocal, of the electric guitars, and that the sounds you're using aren't getting in the way of each other. The ability to do this and carve out just the right amount of space is what makes EQ the #1 skill that you need to know. But don't think that you need to go get a degree in audio engineering to start to improve your live sounds using EQ. I want to share a few really practical first steps that you can take to start to use EQ to make your sounds translate live. All right, let's take a look. Now I'm going to be using MainStage for this video, but whether you're using MainStage, Ableton, or Omnisphere, these principles are going to be the same. So I'm going to open up my EQ plugin here, and this is a multi-band EQ. We've got lower frequencies here on the left side, the mid-range is right here in the middle, and then the high end up on the right side. And I'm able to move these bands up or down to boost or cut specific frequencies. Now again, don't feel like you have to go out and read a bunch of books or articles online about EQ. I'm just going to give you 3 practical things that you can check after you've already designed a sound to see if you can use EQ to make it better. So I've got this pad sound here. And if I move my mod wheel up, the sound gets brighter. And you can see the frequencies on screen as I play. So we've got a lot of frequencies here, we've got some bass, then we've got some sizzle up here towards the high end. And so if you've got a pad sound like this, just grab one of the bands of your EQ and just sweep it around. And pay attention to how it changes the nature of your sound. And I recommend doing this with a cutting band. Don't boost things up because you're gonna notice things a lot more. It can be helpful to pull things out instead of add things in. And so the first principle that can really add a lot to your sounds is understanding how the low mid-range can contribute to sort of a muddy sound or a lack of clarity in your presets. This is especially true of synth pads and layered sounds. As you start to layer sounds on top of each other, it can be really easy for the low-mid frequency range to get sort of muddled up or overcrowded. So if you're designing a pad sound, if you've already built one, just grab a band and just see if applying a gentle cut somewhere in the low-mid range, maybe between 200 or 500 hertz here, see if that does anything to add a little extra clarity to your sound. This can really help with darker, warmer sounds as well. You notice if I boost these frequencies up, and it gets pretty woofy sounding pretty fast. So sometimes a cut in the low-mid range can really add clarity to your sounds, especially your layered sounds. Now, you've got to understand your context here because this does fill less space in the mix. So if you're playing a solo set or if you have a pretty sparse band, sometimes you're the one who needs to fill that low-mid range. But if you have a bass player, an electric guitarist, or 2 live drums, oftentimes you need to give this space up so that other instruments can shine in it and you don't get in the way. So that's the first thing to check is low-mid frequency. If you pull out some of those sounds, does it add clarity to your mix? Secondly, we're going to talk about the low end. Now again, context is important. If you have a bass player, a drummer, guitarists in your band, you might not need to fill much space in the low range. Right now, this pad sound that I'm using has a lot of bass. You can see my bass notes down here, and I've got even this rumble all the way down at the bottom. And when I'm playing by myself, it sounds nice and full, but in a full band context, I might be stepping on my other band members' toes. So depending on your context, sometimes applying a low cut to your sounds can free up space and add some room for the rest of your band members to really breathe and sit where they are supposed to, where they have the most prominent space to fill. And the last thing to check is sort of the inverse side of that, to check on the high end, the high range of your sounds, especially when you're working with synth pads that maybe get brighter. Or if you're playing higher notes on the keyboard itself, sometimes these high frequencies can be a little bit overbearing. And like we talked about in video 2, perception is so important. So if you're playing a lot of high note register parts, it's worth going up here to the top and seeing if cutting a little bit off of the high end in your EQ makes those sounds sit better in the mix. Now sometimes for synth lead parts, you want all of that brightness, you want all of those high frequencies to really stand out. But it's worth considering and thinking about the goal of the sound that you're designing. Do you need it to stand out? Do you need it to be aggressive in those high frequencies or not? And if the answer is no, then just applying a little bit of a high cut up on the top can really help it sit well in the mix. So like I said, you don't have to go out and become an expert on EQ. Honestly, one of the best ways that I learned when I was starting to experiment with trying to use EQ to improve the quality of my sounds was, what does this knob do? If I turn this up, how does it sound? If I turn this down, how does it sound? Don't be afraid to open a plugin on a sound that you've already built and experiment. Just save a backup copy of it if you'd like, so you can always go back to the original if you change something and you don't like how it turned out. All right, so far in this video series, we've talked about the things that can help you prepare for your live performance at home, but we haven't actually talked about what you do when you get to the auditorium, to the sanctuary, to the venue where you're going to be performing. And that's what we're gonna talk about in the last video in this series. So make sure that you come back around, don't miss it.